What is happening, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Austin, and welcome to the One Last Hit podcast. And once again, you guys are in for a treat. My good buddy Marc B is joining us today. Marc, what's happening, man? How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Austin. I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, good to have you. So I've known Marc for a couple of years now. I've heard pieces of Marc's story, and I know that the specimen you see sitting in front of you today was not the same one that was homeless on the streets of Chicago a number of years back. So I'm very, very excited to get into your story, bud. So tell me, where does it all begin, man? What did your childhood look like? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, absolutely. So, born in Chicago. Most of my 51 years spent there. Moved to Orlando 3 years ago with my family. But yeah, I was born on the west side of Chicago, where everyone here is Chicago, which is an amazing, beautiful city. But yes, we have our troubled areas like most major metropolitan areas. So I was born on the wild, wild west side, as they call it, right, which is Murder City, in the ghetto, in a mostly Puerto Rican, bordering an African-American neighborhood filled with poverty, like us, growing up that way, and a lot of gangs and violence and all of that. I spent, up to about first grade there, and then we started moving to different places, apartments, and, kind of subpar neighborhoods, lower blue collar to poor. We eventually made our way up to getting to, more mid-level, safer suburban areas, but still there was always riffraff that I navigated to. So yeah, born, there, and, 12 schools, 4 high schools, youngest of 4, and just, a lot of calamity early on, right? Just you kind of born into that world. So.
Did you say 12 schools?
Yeah. So we just moved a lot, right? I'll wait till you prompt me on the family dynamics, but the dynamics dictated.
Go for it.
Oh, yeah. So I was the last of 4 kids, right? So my mother, she fell in love with this, man who courted her, this handsome 16-year-old, boy, teenager. She was 16, fell in love, first love, lost her virginity, got pregnant, and married him. And that was my real father, who has passed of cirrhosis decades ago at 46 years old. God rest him. I don't believe he ever found the solution of any type of sobriety, but obviously. But yeah, my mom was 23 years old, and I was the 4th child to be born. So imagine. And he was, crazy. So the stories from her was he was this charming, debonair, courting gentleman who picked up a beer at 17 years old, and she says almost immediately, in hindsight, he became an alcoholic. He was addicted or dependent on alcohol right away, and that man drank almost a case of beer daily, through the next few decades of his life before he passed from cirrhosis, and it killed him. But she divorced him, when I was 1 year old. Married my stepfather, who lived across the street. They were friends of ours, from my family, I guess, because we were neighbors. My stepfather, Marty, she had known for years through her, while she was married to my real father and all his kids. We were neighbors. So he came home from Vietnam after 2 tours in Nam, and he took on the responsibility, which he probably shouldn't have, of 4 children. And he married my mother. He became my stepfather. So since I was like 1.5, I grew up with him. And, fortunately or unfortunately, he was a monster, right? He was extremely controlling. He was emotionally unavailable. I lived with him until I was a junior in high school, when I moved out, and almost a brawl with him. And, extreme physical, emotional abuse from him. He almost killed me like 3 times, almost bled out by the time I was between 3 and 6, and just bashing my head against banisters and all kinds of, just very severe, sick, twisted child abuse, and a lot of, and I don't know what happened to him. I don't know, his mother was my godmother, and she was a bilingual Catholic grade school teacher in poverty in the ghetto that loved the Lord, right? And I'm like, well, I know she didn't inflict that on him, because, obviously the ripple effect, right? Both of sobriety and grace and love and good parenting, as well as the abuse and the trauma and all of that. So I never knew, and I still don't know where, what affected him to such a degree to be so violent, especially towards, a young child. And I was the youngest, and he started, beating me at 3, and I had 3 older siblings he really didn't put a hand on. So it was very odd, right? And he continued that abuse for years. So there was instability emotionally. There was instability in the house and financially. My mother was a waitress. She did everything she could to take care of us. We were on and off welfare. He was a strong worker. He was meticulously clean. He was a sergeant, like I said, in Nam. Maybe he had Agent Orange that discolored his personality. I don't know what happened, but he worked for a factory. Then he worked for the United States Post Office until he retired. So he did serve the government. He served his country. Which I do respect that part about him. 9 years as a sergeant, two tours in Nam, and decorated with a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. And but he never told me he loved me. One of those deals, right? Never gave me the keys, right? Never gave me the map. Never showed me how to, make healthy decisions as a young man. Never affirmed me, and that really took its toll, right? So that's why the schools, all the neighborhoods, always trying to fit in with new crowds, and. The anxious apartness we talk about, being in a big room but feeling uncomfortable, and all of that. So yeah, childhood had a lot of calamity. I do believe that, for me, alcoholic and addict to the extreme. I'm a hopeless variety, right? I'm a late stage chronic, alcoholic and drug addict. And I think if the abuse wasn't there and he was loving and affirming and kind like my mother was, I still would have been that. I just believe that. And, some people buy into the genetic predisposition of alcoholism and drug addiction, and some people don't. What I know is, man, my family's riddled with alcoholics. My dad died at 40. My dad drank beer. He drank beer to the extent from 16 to 46 to shut his organs down and kill his liver. Just beer. He never touched a shot of nothing. Crazy. Yeah. So anyways, yeah, I think I would have been that way anyway. So anyway.
How did it feel? I mean, growing up. So if I picture, I've got a 3-year-old at home, and if I could picture that poor young boy being somehow physically abused in his home, I can't even imagine the effect that would have on him. Do you recall what it felt like to be you as a kid?
Yeah, great question. And like you, and I know you're a proud and grateful father of a lot of kids in a big family. And I have one beautiful angel, my daughter Angelia, who's going to be 9 in October. And I've thought about it since day one, right? When I was holding her at Northwestern Hospital, downtown Chicago on October 11th of 2017, that this gift, this beautiful prize that I never thought that I would have or deserve, from what I came out of, what I went through. But, I went through years of therapy. I still am see a psychiatrist. I was diagnosed years ago with complex PTSD to an acute level. And I just want to preface this as well for anyone who might be watching this that may have experienced some type of deep trauma, might have an emotional and mental disorder and a psychological disorder like myself, or in a relationship with somebody that's afflicted with this, that, for years I used my abuse as a crutch to hate the world and hate everyone. And everything I did, I excused. If you went through what I went through, you grew up in the streets, the violence, the fighting, the gangs, you grew up in my household, you had that abuse, you would have do this too. And really what I was doing is I was just excusing my behavior. After I became an adult, I knew right from wrong. And of course, there were certain things I could not control, Austin, but there were certainly things that I needed to take responsibility for and change. And through my road for recovery and sobriety and healing and change and unpacking all that, I've been able to take responsibility for my life, coupled with having a sustained mental illness, and I really do have that. So that's part of my story. But as a little boy, I was frightened, man. I was scared constantly. It was like I was walking around with Lucifer in the house many a day. And I can remember vividly, I remember the beatings vividly. When I say I have complex PTSD, same thing as a soldier coming home, waking up in the middle of the night, with a knife in his hand, like he's walking through the jungle in the bush, with the Viet Cong, around him. And it's not always that severe, but all the milder, but very damaging the emotional turmoil and the aspects emotionally, I still have, right? Like I still have a head full of trauma. I still have to deal with that, and I would love to say, hey, I've been sober, besides 4 days, I had a relapse. I've been sober for 15 plus years, right? I entered AA in 2011, got sober finally, had a 4-day relapse in 15, have been sober since, and my life is incredibly radically changed and transformed through that work. But the truth about me is, in the spirit of transparency, that I suffer greatly emotionally, and any given day I can wake up and that is just activated. And it's hard for me to navigate through the world in my head, right? But as a little boy, I was petrified, and I acted out a lot, quite a bit actually. So
Yeah. No, I was just trying to kind of like picture that in my own mind, like what that looked and felt like. And so I would imagine by the time, how old were you when you took your first drink or drug? What first time you caught a buzz?
yeah, absolutely. So, my stepfather wasn't an alcoholic, but when he drank VO, and he drank to excess and drunkenness.
Mm.
And he was a weekend warrior, or would drink, beer, but so he would drink on the weekends. In our house, my grandparents all drank alcoholics. So I was drinking beer and, at 3 years old, sipping it, all of that. When I caught my first buzz, I was probably around 10 or 11 at one of my sister's first weddings, but I was constantly around liquor, every family occasion. We were a big drinking family, all of that. So, but yeah, I mean, if you ask me when did you have your first drunk or high or be inebriated, it would have been about 10 or 11, I would say.
And what would happen, like, so from the age of 10, when you first discovered, wow, there's a solution to the way that I'm feeling, how does it progress from that point forward?
Yeah, at that point, I was so young. Throughout my junior high years, we would, remarkably so, which we'll get into my story later, the type of alcoholic and addict I am. I didn't get high or drunk until my mid-teens. It was kind of odd. I think sports, I did navigate to sports. I played a ton of sports as a kid and throughout most of my life. So I think that helped a lot. But yeah, we'd sneak away with a couple beers and, Marble Reds and go to the park and
Hmm.
cough and drink the beer, which I hated the taste of it and stuff. So yeah, I did not know, I did not identify or understand at 10 years old, like, oh, this makes me feel oozy and fun, that this is a solution for me. It didn't correlate. But when it did, hell broke loose, right? When it did, my middle teens, that's when, the light went on, like, oh, I could get a little temporary relief from the way I feel, which I really needed.
Yeah. And so middle teens, was there a catalyst at that time, or was it social pressure that kind of reintroduced you to drugs and alcohol, or what was it that really kicked you off?
Yeah, so typical high school, bouncing around. And freshman year, 3 sport letterman, sophomore year, 2.5 sports, because I quit halfway through the season because my coach pissed me off. Here comes, the emotional, ego, resentment, anger. Junior year, yeah, 1 sport, and then none my senior year, which is a shame. I was a really good athlete, right? And I had potential to do a lot. No, yeah. And but how that correlates to my drinking and drugging is, I never realized till years later that the increase in alcohol and marijuana decreased my commitment to my sports. And because of the alcohol and marijuana, I had consequences, crashing cars, fighting in public, where I had consequences, financial consequences, where I had to get a job in high school to start paying this stuff as well, which I couldn't be committed to a sports, practice and game regimen. So, but yeah, when I started drinking in high school, I was crazy. I'm an extremely extroverted, one of the most extroverted people that most people meet. I have that high energy level, always had. That is my disposition. I was born with. And imagine that fueled by alcohol, hyper energy, throw a mental illness on there, and I'm wild. So people who love me were like, Borelli's absolutely fucking crazy, and he's a riot. But if he starts swinging, run, because he's going to throw the whole place up for grabs. And I was that guy. So
Oh,
yeah, but
God.
I loved it. I absolutely love being drunk, and I love marijuana, and those were my first two, substances that I just ran with through the rest of my high school years before I got to the harder stuff.
Yeah, and nobody in high school says, take a few drinks, smoke a couple of doobies, have a good time, and nobody equates to, in my case, it was homeless in Mexico City. In your case, homeless in Chicago, right?
Mm.
Smoking crack, shooting heroin, doing what we do. What's the progression? Like, how do we get to that point?
Oh man, it's so hard. There's so much there. I'm really going to work hard to give you the Cliff Notes version, but chronologically for it to make sense and kind of tie it together, Austin.
Yeah.
So after high school, remarkably, I had a major injury. I severed my left Achilles tendon a month after graduation. I barely graduated, not because I wasn't intelligent enough. I moved out my junior year of high school. I got no credits half a junior year. I smoked weed and drank daily, chased girls. And, that was when, the rap era and Public Enemy and Easy and all that stuff in the late 90s. So I was in that scene, going to clubs, dancing, house music, all that stuff. And then I moved back home. I hated it. I moved back home my senior year, and I had to transfer schools yet again in my fourth high school. And I had to buckle down and focus, or I wasn't going to graduate high school. So I did do that. I had ambitions to go back and wrestle again. I had wrestled, varsity my sophomore year, and I skipped junior year because of, the other things I was involved in. But my plan was, let's go. And then one drunken night, I crashed a car, 17 years old, drunk as heck, totaled my sister's car, get in a fight. And there it goes. I have to work to pay it off. I can't wrestle that year. And so anyways, I barely graduated high school, but I did graduate. I severed my Achilles tendon on my left leg, making $5 an hour at a bar, washing dishes. And that sidelines me for 6 months in a cast. I try to go to junior college, and I'm going to junior college night school, and I get my first career position at a computer company downtown Chicago, across the street from a Sears Tower, which is really cool. So now I'm in corporate America, where I was supposed to be the whole time. That's actually where I was supposed to be, because, business, just came naturally to me. So I started working, full time. I got engaged. That blew up. We were too young. I fell in love with another woman, moved downtown Chicago, became independent, working full time as a computer salesman and dating a woman. And I was possessively jealous of her. She was beautiful, much older than me. And we were madly in love, and she left me. And this is really key, because this is kind of a pattern from my life. And she said to me, she says, it's a shame what they did to you, because I want to grow old with you. I want to have a family with you. I'm madly in love with you. We have perfect chemistry and interest, but you don't trust me, and you are broken inside, and I can't stay along for this. And she goes, I'm so sorry what you've been through. And it was the right thing for her to do. And I had an anger outburst at work after that computer company, 3.5 years as a successful computer salesman for an Apple Macintosh company in the early 90s. Now it's almost mid 90s. And she left me, and I also lost my job. And I was alone in my apartment. I never forgot. I sat there crying by myself in Little Italy, Chicago. And I called the guy, and he dropped an 8-ball off. And I became immediately, and I had dabbled with cocaine a lot. And when I first did cocaine, I spent all night doing it. It was in that cast at 18 years old when I severed my Achilles. Some guy brought it out, and I just did lines all night. I loved it. I'm like, my God, I love every narcotic. Everything I've done, I've loved. I've absolutely loved every ride. People say, hey, my best day drunk is worse than my, whatever it is. Than my worst day sober. They did it wrong. That is the most absurd bullshit thing I've ever heard, man. Before it got bad, it was awesome. I seen Pink Floyd on mushrooms and the best hydroponic weed, like 94 at Soldier Field, Chicago, right? Sitting at the 50-yard line of my beloved Chicago Bears, watching, listen, that wasn't me shitting myself, trying to get dope, climbing out the project's window in the ghetto. So no, my worst day, I was not, right? Like, I don't know what you did, but let me tell you, I liked almost every ride. And even at the end, when it was so pathetic and so hopeless, dude, I needed it. I couldn't deal with reality. So, to fast forward, all right. So I'm now through the mid 90s, I lost a corporate job. I start waiting tables, excellent waiter, some of the nicest neighborhoods downtown Chicago, really successful, $200-300 a night. I'm a head waiter and a bartender. This is 95. That's a lot of money, right? So I'm making $200-300 a night. My rent's $575. I'm 3 months behind on rent. I make that in 2 nights in the month. I'm behind on rent. I have baggies all over the house. I'm smoking weed, staying up 3-4 days in a row, grinding it out. And, I enter my first treatment center, first of 17 treatments from 1997 to 2005. I go to 17 treatments and detoxes, inpatient, men's residential. first through benefits, then, I'm walking into Skid Row, Haymarket, the lowest of the low. That's where Chicago police are taking homeless drunks that are defecating themselves, and they're dropping them off at the front, right? So I'm riding that train now towards the end. But I really try to get my life together a number of times. And like it says in the big book, he kind of cleans himself up. He kind of builds up a little bit of a future, bright future, and then he tears it all down again. And that's the hopelessness and the powerlessness of what I was afflicted with, right? And I fully comprehended and understood a path to sobriety. I knew tons of people who were sober. I was in and out of the rooms. I probably went through 1,000 to 1,500 recovery, meetings, 12-step meetings. And I know people get sober a lot of different ways. But for me, I was going to NA, mostly AA, NA, and CA. And, I was well-versed in it. I was a perfect treatment client. I knew all the things to say and what they were going to break it down. The medical, emotional, aspect of how it afflicts us and what the solution was. I never doubted it at all, but I had absolutely zero willingness to really, really get serious and do the work. So what it looked like from 97 to 2005, and in my mind, Austin, that seems like 20 years, but it was a short period of time, but it seems like a couple of decades of my life, man. Because it was just this unbelievable calamity, consequence-filled, mayhem of life, just completely insane. And I was good at business, right? I was a good recruiter. I'm a great salesman. And, I never owned my own company, but, I've been with my company 14 and a half years as a chief operating officer, extremely successful with them, and so in the 90s, I went back into sales. I went back into mortgage. I went into mortgage banking. I went into executive recruiting for a couple of contingent and retained firms. And I was hired as operation manager, branch manager, building teams under me, rocking it out 3-6 months, right? And just, picking up again, right? Never really being able to put any time together. At times, what I could do is put 30, 45 days, go to a meeting or two a week and kind of live in the rooms and sit my ass in a seat of recovery, but not really do the deep, intense, work on myself emotionally and spiritually through the guidance of a sponsor and the literature and the steps as our pathway to freedom. And therefore, I just had a worse relapse and a worse relapse and another institution, and going through some relationships. And eventually met my current wife, who's a Christian woman, who's never smoked a cigarette, seen anybody drink. She's in a completely sheltered, real, wholesome, genuine, organic Christian family who loved God and loved the world and loved people and had absolutely 100% opposite life experience than me. And I meet her and she falls in love with me. And imagine, I have a relationship with God. I'm in and out of a big evangelical church. I'm doing service periodically at that church. I'm leaving that church and going to the projects and smoking crack. I was afflicted. I was afflicted by something evil. And, I by myself, 26 years old at Willow Creek Community Church, 7,000 person, beautiful church. And, weeping on stage, getting baptized with no one there but me. Like I was really trying to find a solution. I really wanted to change. And there were so many times I was on my knees crying, weeping to God, like, why won't you help me? I'm weak. I can't do this. And I don't have the answers why those prayers weren't heard, right? And people can speculate because everyone's certain about what God is. I'm not certain. But what I do know, right? Everyone's just an authority and they know everything, right? It's and I'm like, I don't know. I would like to think, well, I was going to drag myself through the mud and the muck, and I was going to gain a life experience that could help some people, right? I was going to gain a life experience that when I became a dad, I would never put my hands on her, abuse her, or torment her like I was tormented. That I would be a changed man, and therefore I would have purpose, and I just had to go through what I had to go through. But what happened when I met her is I continued this process with my sweet wife, right? Like, I'm working as a sales director at a large mortgage banker broker, making good money. We're engaged. This is like 2003, 2004. I'm kind of in and out of AA. I'm, putting 30 days together and picking up again. We're going to church twice a week. I'm serving in a children's ministry, and I'm binging on the crack and the projects for 3 and 4 days once a month. Right. And I'm losing jobs and barely making it. So 2005, I go through 2 more treatment centers. From First Capital, the brokerage firm I'm working for. They put me to hospital. I still have my Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I relapsed on both of those after those in a short time. And I remember the day. It was a Friday night. I took the team that I hired, groomed, mentored, managed, and directed downstairs at a really swanky, bougie, new contemporary corporate building along the Chicago River in Chicago. And I went downstairs, I bought them all a beer, and I bought myself one. And I drank that beer, and I had like 30 days, 32 days again for like literally like the 50th time. And I went home and I said, I'm going. She's like, please don't go. I'm going, but I'm not going to stay in the project, Sonny. I'm just going to cop in the courtyard between the two projects, and I'm going to come home. And I never went back to work. For the next 6 years, I would stay drunk or high every single day. I took the engagement ring off her finger. I sold it for 20% of what I paid for it. I used that money within 48 hours on crack cocaine. I sold everything in the house. I cash advanced all our credit cards. I fully bankrupt us. I borrowed and basically stole money because I borrowed with no intention to pay back from everyone I could. And then I found myself probably 6 months into this mayhem in trouble because now I couldn't get a dime from anything or anybody. So it just hit me one day. I can go on the street, pretend that that I locked my keys in the car with my dog and ask somebody for taxi money to get home. And at this time, I'm not that burnt up. And I became a professional con artist to the tune of $100 an hour for the next 6 years, conservatively in the tune of probably about $350,000 that I created with my sponsor, my first sponsor, a conservative estimation of what I had taken from society. And I became a thief and robbing people. And, and I lived like a savage. I was up for 3, 4, 5 days, and then I'd pass out. I was, just massively addicted to crack cocaine. Heroin came in the picture. I was overwhelmingly addicted to heroin at that point. So we call it on the streets of Chicago double-breasted, is when you're addicted to both. So I had the two monsters that I was addicted to. And, every day of my life was insane. I'd literally get up. I would dry shave with the razor. My wife was a makeup artist, so I'd take makeup and put it on my face. So I didn't look with the dope fiend addict I was. I would put a shirt and a tie on, and I would have like a traveling suitcase. And I had a con that literally for years, Austin, for years, I had people give me hundreds of dollars, but there was never a day where I couldn't hustle a couple $100 ever. Not one time from 2005 to 2011, where I was finally, hopefully arrested for the last time as a homeless dope fiend, living in an abandoned building next to the projects. And I've been there for a couple of years. So, insane things happen, and what happened is I finally went to homelessness, but my sweet wife, who was my fiancée at the time, she stayed in that lifestyle with me for 3 years, having faith that one day God would change me. And then eventually I walked away from her and Dexter, our dog, our Weimaraner, who I never saw again. And I went to the streets, and I was okay with that. I went to an abandoned building 3 doors down from the projects in Murder City on the west side of Chicago, in an abandoned garage with dope fiends and hustlers and pimps and prostitutes and needles and syringes and baggies all over. And that would become my life for the next 2 years. I would live, throughout, popping into a homeless shelter, living in alleys, living under cardboard, living in abandoned buildings, sleeping in the first time I went to the projects in 1997, I grew up fighting on the street. I ran with the gang. I was an athlete, but I literally ran with the gang, Gangster Disciple of Chicago. Let me tell you something. Even me, going to the projects the first time to cop crack with my friend who got a full ride at Division I wrestling. We wrestled together, Kyle. I was scared, man. Walking the projects is no joke. It's just like TV, right? I mean, it's no joke. I mean, the cartel in Mexico, I know your story. Yeah, no joke, right? Like, this is like, listen, you're risking your life. I went from being scared to go there the first time, going there hundreds of times, eventually living sometimes for a week, sleeping in the stairwells, right, with other addicts and dope things. So that's the insanity of the transformation of how this thing can take you. So, so that's where I went. That's how it happened. And there's 1,000 stories I can tell you about that period from 2005 to 2011. But I literally, not for one day, besides the few, the handful of times I was incarcerated for 17 days, for 28 days, did I breathe a sober breath, right? So, yeah, it's crazy.
In your story, I'm struck by the faith that your wife had to stick around and to watch you go through all of that, knowing that she's absolutely powerless to do anything about it but pray. And now you guys have a family together. Like, that is incredible, Mark. Wow.
Yes, she had the faith and the willingness that I never could have. I would have jumped ship. I'm just, call me weak, selfish, but it's it really is incredible. 25 years now together, and got married in 2014. So I guess May 3rd was or excuse me, May 24th. Yeah, I guess 12 years of marriage, and almost 9-year-old beautiful girl, and we've been through a lot, man. A lot of life, dude.
Yeah, no kidding. And so in all of that, 17 treatment centers, homeless, hustling on the streets of Chicago, which, by the way, as you were talking, and I've only been to Chicago one time, but I remember when I was living in Mexico thinking I was going to do a little import export business. And I asked them, I said, well, okay, how can you get, like, where can I get some kilos in the United States? And they said there were 2 cities that the cartel could confirmed get kilos in no problem. And it was Miami and Chicago.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
that was
Chicago's a huge pathway, man. And I mean, the heroin in Chicago is, dude, you go to neighborhoods, and there's just a neighborhood, dude, there's 100 corners selling heroin, right? Competing against each other. So it's super pure, right? You rarely got garbage because, hey, the demand's there and the competition's stiff, right? You can't have a shitty pizza place in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? Because that pizza's been, they've been cooking that pizza pie for 140 years, right? Like, you're not going to get away with a Domino's type pizza in Brooklyn. That's how it is in Chicago. But yeah, it's another world. And, anyone who's watching this, I have to say, because you know how proud I am of Chicago, what my Chicago tattoo is. It is one of the world-class, unbelievable, beautiful cities in the world. There's 9 million people in the greater metropolitan area. We have our ghetto areas. Besides that, it is fantastic. I miss it dearly. Man, it is just beautiful. And so is New York and Boston and San Fran. And they all have their poverty. They all have their drug addiction and crime. And they all have their ghetto areas and the homeless crisis. But what a beautiful place. And I'm grateful for that, man. I am so grateful. As a successful man today, as I sit here, talking to you, and I needed this very much, man. I've been my program, my spiritual program for my recovery and my development, continued development in my life has been anemic. I have not been doing nearly as much as I once did, and I've been selfish, taking time with my family, going on vacation every other week because I work remotely and I can grab a laptop and go. So this is really good for my soul to remember where I came from. It just filled me up already, just remembering the torment. There's 1,000 stories, dude, and I know you have them and other people, but I live like a savage, man. I went months being unshowered, months, and guns put to my head, robbing people. I eventually started robbing cab drivers, and a couple violently, 2 felonies, incarcerated, facing, 6 to 8 years in prison, and somehow, by the grace of God, changed the judge's mind. And he told me I was going. He says, it's not a matter of if, but it's how long. I'll see you in 45 days, and threw my file down. He was disgusted with me. And I went back, and they asked me the day before my court date when I was locked up. And they said, tell us about all of this. And I said, I did every crime. I've done so many more. I've been through 17 treatments and detoxes. I've tried to get sober and recover for years. I'm hopeless. I've lost everything in my life. I haven't seen my family for almost 6 years. I left my fiancée, this beautiful Christian woman, behind. And I said, maybe if I go to prison, maybe I could, do 3 to 6 years or 3 to 4 years on, because it's 2 for 1 in the prison penal system in Illinois. So if I get 6 to 8 years, I do 3 to 4 years in prison and kind of rebuild my life and have hope. But at that point, I wanted to die every day for real. Like when people say they want to die, but I never wanted to kill myself. It's really interesting. And I never put my finger on it. I want to die every single day. I live in torment and hell alone. I'm homeless for 2 years, dude. Like, I'm walking down the street and there's a piece of cardboard. I remember this, next to a dry cleaner. And I just lay down in a dirt field in an abandoned lot and pulled the cardboard and passed out for 48 hours. Woke up, I had spider bites, infection. It was crazy. I lived like that, right? So that life, and then I dry up, I detox for 6 weeks. I put 30 pounds on, and 3.5 months later, they're like, hey, we're going to sentence you today. And I'm like, okay. I had hope. I was praying. I was going to meetings in jail. And I said, okay, I'm alive somehow, and I'm willing to rebuild my life. I'm willing to not ask anyone for help. I'm willing to not bullshit or negotiate any terms with anyone. And that's how I got sober. That's how I recovered, as I accepted nothing from anyone. I shut my fucking mouth, and I got busy and got to work. I didn't look for praise, for affirmation. I wasn't screaming, I'm sober, look at me. All that went away, dude. I put my nose to the grindstone. I got busy and I was sincere, and I stopped lying and bullshitting people, and I never stole a thing again in my life. I was a felon thief who was robbing people for years. And since May 3rd of 2011, hopefully my last, jail date or incarceration or arrest date, I definitely have defects and have made mistakes, right? And some that I'm not proud of. But I'm not the same man who walked in, and I've radically transformed a lot of that stuff through help and faith and, spiritual work and action. But, the one thing I don't say proud because I don't like hearing that sometimes, but I was given the willingness and the ability somehow to not be a thief anymore. And man, that's good, Now I've stole some peace of mind from my wife because I can still be an unsober dick and selfish, and impatient, which I was yesterday to an extreme level. I owe her amends. And, but yeah, I didn't have to be that guy anymore. Man, what a relief. I could earn my life, right?
Yeah. And I'm curious, as somebody who wanted to get sober, now maybe earnestly wanted to get sober, but didn't have quite the willingness to do the work. What was your turning point? Like, what did it look like when you actually went down the path? And this is before the 4-day relapse, because I think you genuinely wanted sobriety prior to that and just had a relapse. Am I correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, when we look like what changed, right? Well, I mean, everything was burnt down to ashes for years, right? And then I came to in jail, went through my detox, which was 6 weeks. It was brutal. Started to get some semblance of reality. The fog was lifting, and I found myself facing jail time, serious prison time, and it was okay with that. And it took me about 6 weeks. If they would have let me out anytime within the first 6 weeks, I was plotting. I'm like, once I go back to my abandoned place, my abandoned home in the abandonmenium, we call them in Chicago, all my stuff's probably going to be gone. I'm going to have to recoup all, the dress clothes to go hustle and be a con artist. And I'm planning it. I'm planning exactly how long does it take me for 6 weeks, every day. How long is it going to take me to get there, to get an outfit, get dressed, hit the streets, start my hustle, get money, and get dope? That's exactly what I was planning for 6 weeks. But I had a court date 6 weeks in, and I heard his response, and I knew I was going to prison, and I had a shift that night. And I'm not a religious guy. I used to be, but I'm not. I'm a spiritual man for sure, but I have no interest in religion in any capacity whatsoever. And that's my choice, and I can freely speak that. And I am completely okay with how anyone else believes. If they're atheist, agnostic, Allah, Buddha, I don't care, But when it comes to my faith at that time, that what really worked for me was more of a religious dedication. So I got my Bible at that time, which I don't do anymore. And I read, I meditated, I prayed over it, and it did affect me. I did have a spiritual, transformation, a beginning of one in jail. And I knew that I was going to stay sober in my mind. For me, like, I knew that I was going to pursue sobriety. I wasn't arrogant enough to say I can stay sober. No, don't get me wrong. I was scared to relapse, but I had a confidence that I could do it. I had a confidence that I can get I had tons of practical, tangible AA experience and knowledge, mostly from other people that I've been in a relationship with for years. People who still loved me, saw me come in and out, and they were sober for years. And, my spiritual mentor, who I met in 99, and he saw me go through 5 of those 17 treatments, and he sponsored me for years later, right? When I finally got sober. And he's still in my life today, older gentleman, probably at the end of his life. But, I knew these people. I knew the truth, and that there was a solution that made sense. So, what happened for me is when I was let go, which was crazy. So they interviewed me the night before my court hearing, Austin, and they asked me, they say, I can make a recommendation about where we put you, what penitentiary, what level, if there is a recovery program within that where you can go to meetings. But you're a 2-time felon, and one of it's, an aggravated robbery of a cab driver. So you could be a medium or max. And he's like, but I want to give you the opportunity to share with me your perspective and answer some of these questions that'll help my evaluation. I think he was trying to say, he probably looked, I mean, let's just be realistic, right? He probably looked at, okay, here's a guy who doesn't look like the life he was living. And after I cleaned up, I didn't look like some hardened criminal dope fiend after after 3.5 months. I put 30 pounds on, I got my weight back. I'm doing push-ups and working out in jail. And I could speak articulately and communicate with him. And I told him exactly what I told you. I didn't like Denzel in Flight. I could not lie. Remember, he asked the question, "Were you drunk?" And I didn't have any problems answering it. But just like that, I told him the truth, the unfiltered, 100% honest truth about who I was, what I was, where I came from. And I said, hey, if this will do good for my life, that I might be able to rebuild a life and do some good in the world, I fully accept the ramifications for my actions. I am guilty, and I've done a lot more that you don't know of. And he's like, tell me about your past. And I told him about Lynette. I told him about our bright future. I told him about the career, the up and down. Some years ago, I was this guy ready to get married to this beautiful person with a beautiful dog and a little home and hope. And I just, I'm sick, and I've been through a lot, and he was the South Side Chicago Irish guy. I was a West Side Italian American guy. And, and I didn't know what his take would be, but he said, I really appreciate you being so candid with me. And he goes, and I really hope that you have a life someday. I do. I'm going to make my recommendation. He didn't tell me what it was. I went to court the next day. I'm definitely going to prison. It's just a matter of how long. And after like 4.5 hours in a cell waiting for, the judge and my public defender, he came back and said, they're releasing you in the morning. If you sneeze the wrong way for the next 2 years, you're going to prison for 8 years. No good time. Right. And I just sat there. I just didn't know what to do. And then eventually I just jumped up in the air, and it felt, I never had a good vertical as an athlete. I'm pretty good at other. And I swear to God, I think I might have touched the ceiling of that cell. And the very next day, they dropped me off at A Safe Haven, a 4-month program that I could not work. I had to be a rigorous program, really no movement at all besides going to meetings and getting like Social Security card and stuff like that. And I surrendered, and I was a fully surrendered person. I prayed daily. I followed directions. The first consequence I got of that program was I lied to them to tell them I had to go to the Social Security office to fill out some more paperwork for my Social Security card, because I didn't have a birth certificate, a state ID, or Social Security card on my person for 6 years, right? So I had to get all that stuff, right? And I lied to them, and I went to a meeting. Well, one of the staff members there goes to that morning meeting in Evanston, Illinois, right by Northwestern University. And he saw me there, unbeknownst to me. And I got back like, where were you? I'm like, I was at the meeting. They said, you know what, Mark, let me tell you something. We've had thousands of men come in and out of this program over the years. Never one time has one lied to us about this. I'm like, about what? They're like, you were at an AA meeting at the Evanston Club this morning, and one of our faculty members saw you there. 2 things. We commend you because you truly have a desire to stay sober. There's no doubt about it. Nobody's fucking lying here to go to the Social Security office for their card and go into a meeting. So obviously you want sobriety. We get that. But this is a Safe Havens program. It's not Mark's program. So you do have a consequence. And they locked me down for a week. But they smirked and they're like, but good job. And I know what they meant was they knew they had a guy there out of the 45 men, who knows. I don't know anybody else who got sober. I kept track of a lot of the guys for a couple of years, but most of them went back to prison, never heard from them again. But I had a desire, right? And then, yeah, man. And then they transferred me after that 4 months. I had a probation officer I reported to. I could not leave the state. I had very restricted, but I was able to get a job, and I did. And I remember in December of 2011, 5 months sober, I was able to finally get a sponsor, which I did immediately. I started working steps, and I got my first job as a bill collector. I have the pay stub here. Do you know in 2 weeks how much I made? I made $217 in 2 weeks take home pay as a bill collector, right? So now, as a C-level executive of a company for I've been with there 14 years. I've been a COO for 11. That keeps me humble, man. It keeps me on the right track, right? But what was a sign of, Austin? I was really like, listen, I didn't have a car for the first 5 years of my sobriety. I lived very simple. And let me tell you something. I was stress-free, dude. The light went on. I got busy in programs, started being in service. And another thing that happened to me is and this contributed to my relapse 4.5 years in, but my story was extremely compelling, right? And I'm not the only one with a story like that. But if there was ever a description of a life that should have been over or just was hopeless and just had no chance of recovery. I had one of those stories. So used to speak as the keynote speaker, a lot of galas. I started doing that. I got on the board of directors of the same shelter I used to visit, which houses 400 men and women. I'm like the only white guy, all black, in the hood, man, in the ghetto. And one of the directors there was in program, listened to my story and says, hey, the block you're describing by the projects, you ever go to Franciscan Health Mary and Joseph Shelter? I'm like, dude, I was in and out there for years. They kept kicking me out for stealing food. And eventually he's like, oh my God, I'm one of the senior case managers there. So then all these ran by Franciscan Catholics. So all these 60, 70, 80-year-olds have been, on the board of directors, a doctor, a lawyer. They all interview me and they're like, hey, we want you to consider being on the board of directors of the state operated multiple shelters and outreach centers throughout Chicago. And then here I am, a couple years sober as a board of director with some really credentialed, prestigious people. And then my story, got a little bit more known. I was interviewed a couple of times, all this stuff. So it started to take off, right? And I started to live this life of resilience and recovery and transformation. And it was pretty good, but it did affect my ego too, I think. In hindsight, I think that might have led to some things between my fourth and fifth year where I picked up again for a short period of time. And but it was all something I had to learn. But why my life changed is I've known plenty of people who are surrendered as me. And I think what I'm afflicted with, as sick as I am, to the extreme of my chronic addiction to substances, if I did not possess that willingness for whatever reason it came to me at that time that was different than before, I think I had no chance whatsoever to stay sober and to rebuild a life that I never had. So it's all about willingness and action, obviously. But yeah, I had it, it just came and it was beautiful, man. It was beautiful because I knew I was fucked every single time, man. I knew that every time I tried to get sober early on, there was no way that I was going to be able to do this forever. And then when I finally had everything taken away and I got put back into life, there was a newfound willingness that was, probably divinely inspired, that gave me the willingness to build this life with a lot of help, but a lot of effort on my own part, right?
Wow. I'm curious, and maybe this can segue us into the end here. One thing that I never had anticipated was the incredible effect that my children would have on me, or the learning to be a father would have on me. And I know, you're just in love with your wife and your daughter, and I'm curious how that has come to play in your recovery, being a dad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful you asked that. So I could turn the phone around, but I'll spare you, and you'll see literally dozens and dozens of things with my daughter all over my office. And I don't compare myself to other people at all, Austin, in this way, not in sobriety, not as a citizen in the world, or not as a family member. I could be a way better husband. I'm I'm afflicted with something that's severe. It makes me, unapproachable at times. It shuts me down emotionally. I still can have impatience and anger issues. And just being honest, I could be a better husband, but I'm a good provider. I take care of these girls. I keep them safe. I protect them. I provide a really wonderful life for them. But I'm required to do more as a husband. I've really been thinking deep about that, that my wife deserves a more emotionally available human being. And I have to probably get some help around there and unpack that again, right? Because why wouldn't I be? She is as loving and as kind. She literally is like Bambi. She is one of the most softest, kindest. She has none of the calamity. She doesn't have resentments, judgments, nothing like that. She's happy, man. She wakes up happy every day. I'm like, how in the hell could somebody be so perfectly adjusted to life? Like, this is bullshit, But it's like, I think a lot of me shutting down is I feel guilty because I'm just not nearly like that on a regular basis. And I'm not a complete break. I laugh a lot. I'm one of the most jovial people. But when it comes to my daughter, when it comes to this beautiful soul that I have such a great privilege, man, I mean, when I have felt hopeless through the years, and I have, man, I have felt emotionally hopeless, butt naked sober and clean. I can look in her eyes and find hope every time. I mean, sincerely. And we are so close, she tells me she loves me, and I tell her I love her multiple times a day. We have special daddy-daughter snuggling time every morning. I've been gifted. I work remotely 100% of the time. So she has woken up with me. She has gone to sleep with me and her mother. I've driven her to school 97.8% of her school days through her years in school. I chaperone. I'm always with her. And I mean, she begs me not to go to meetings. She begs me not to go to the gym. Daddy, just tell them that your daughter needed you, so you couldn't make it today, to the meeting. Yeah, dude, she's hardcore. She's going to be I think she's going to be in hardcore business development because she can negotiate. But it is one of the most beautiful gifts I've ever had, is to be a parent and not produce the trauma, the harm, and the scars in her that I experienced. So, it's just such a beautiful thing. And I love all children. I do. And I think that, and I'm not going to get there at all, but, as an emotionally and kind of a socially liberal type person, where that comes from, Austin, for me, is because I've been abused severely, dude. I almost died. I remember coming to and just blood in my eyes at 3 years old, right? They had to give me a transfusion or put blood in me. I almost bled out. And when you go through shit like that, and you have people telling you're a piece of shit, you'll never amount to nothing, never give you affirmation or love, and you grow up like that, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for people who have made bad decisions like you or me. Like, I'm not trying to burn someone on a stake because they made bad. How could they do that? Well, how self-righteous would it be for me, right? So, when it comes to loving my daughter and when it comes to seeing the world in my worldview, it's real important for me to remember who I am and what I have done and the havoc I have caused and where I come from. So I have a lot of empathy and compassion for everyone. That's why I desperately, deeply love all children, right? I just do, because there's these innocent, impressionable, fragile little souls bouncing around the world, and you see it, man. I was at Quantica last week, and I'll close up with this, and I saw this 40-year-old, 35-year-old mom with a couple kids, and she's like, "Get over here," and she's screaming, and then she goes and hits them, and and not to like extreme child abuse, but I can't even imagine spanking my daughter. I would never ever not spank my daughter. I don't believe in it. And the effect it had on me was visceral. And the next thought afterwards is like, hey, I hope they can find a path to health. And the next thought is, how beautiful that I am an adult survivor of extreme abuse, and that is not my daughter's experience. That experience has been transformed into something beautiful and loving, and she's an amazing. And let me just say this. I just want to get this out, brag a little bit. My daughter got the Empathy Award in first grade from her Christian school.
Wow.
And then this year she got the Problem Solver Award, and her teachers have said she fills up our hope and our love bucket every day. She is as kind and as sweet and as obedient and honest of a kid that we could ever want. What a gift that you have given us to let her be a part of our school. And that's her experience, right? And that's what getting sober has done, man. It has affected them. And that's what it's about, right? It's about them. So.
That gave me goosebumps, Mark. That was so good, buddy. Dude. Man, I was laying down to go to sleep, trying to think of who do I want to have on here, and your name just popped in my head, man. And I'm so glad that we got an opportunity to do this, bud. You are a miracle, and your family is too. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And do me a favor, stick around after I hit the end button so we can chat just for a second. All right.
So much,
for anyone that's listening, dude, Mark, thank you so much, buddy. For anyone that's listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, do us a favor, leave a rating. I don't know if you can leave a comment. I don't know. Do whatever you do on those podcast platforms. That's the best way that you could support us. My name's Austin. We're going to get out of here. Talk to you soon. Bye.